Brilliant work on this turnaround plan. Your vision saved us. Tobias Wren, the lead investor, reached across the table and grabbed Reed Cole's shoulder like they were old teammates celebrating a championship. The handshake went on too long. The smile was too wide. Reed leaned back in his chair with this easy, relaxed confidence, nodding like a man who just earned something. 16 people in that room, every single one of them looking at Reed like he'd just pulled Crestline Industrial Group back from the edge of collapse. I waited. 5 seconds, 10, 15. Reed said, "Thank you. I really appreciate that." Humble voice, like he was trying not to brag. He never looked at me, never said my name. My name is Nolan Harte. I'm 49 years old. I'd been a supply chain strategist at Crestline for 7 years. And what happened in that boardroom in Pittsburgh was the last thing I ever let slide without consequences. 4 months. That's how long I'd spent rebuilding Crestline's entire supply chain model from scratch. 4 months of 12 to 14-hour days while Reed Cole left every Thursday at 2 in the afternoon for what he called client relationship building. Far as I could tell, that meant a long lunch and 18 holes. The model was mine. Every projection, every distribution analysis, every vendor contract recommendation, every implementation timeline built week by week around actual operational constraints rather than optimistic guesswork. I'd identified which of their regional facilities were bleeding cash and why. I'd mapped the vendor relationships worth keeping and the ones costing them more than they realized. I'd found the markets they needed to exit before those positions dragged the whole operation under. Reed had attended 2 of our 11 internal briefings. His name was at the top of the project agenda. Mine was listed under contributors in a font 2 sizes smaller. So when Tobias Wren looked across that boardroom table and said, "Brilliant work to Reed Cole," I sat there and I counted. 5 seconds, 10, 15. Reed thanked him again. Started talking about the importance of forward-thinking leadership. Never once glanced in my direction. I looked around the room. Porter Cole, the company's CEO and Reed's father, sat at the head of the table watching his son with the kind of quiet pride a man reserves for moments he's been waiting years to see. The board members were nodding. One of the investors was already asking Reed follow-up questions about implementation strategy, and Reed was answering in the vague, confident way people answer when they don't actually know the specifics, but have learned that tone carries you a long way in a room like that. I'd watched smaller versions of this exact thing play out for 2 years. Reed rephrasing ideas I'd floated in meetings, presenting them 10 minutes later like they just occurred to him, his name showing up first on reports I'd written 85% of. Getting left off invitations to leadership dinners while I stayed late running the analysis that made those dinners possible. Each time I told myself the work spoke for itself, that eventually someone would notice who was actually producing results. Standing in that boardroom, watching Reed nod along to praise for a plan he couldn't have built in 4 years, I realized nobody was going to notice on their own. They were going to keep looking at the person who looked like the answer and calling that good enough. I reached over, unclipped my employee badge. The one I'd carried for 7 years, set it flat on the table in front of me. Then I stood up. I'm done here. Effective immediately. The room didn't go quiet all at once. Conversations just kind of stopped mid-sentence, one after another, like a sound cutting out. Porter Cole looked at me the way you look at someone who just started speaking a language you don't recognize. "What are you talking about?" he said. "I'm resigning. Right now, you'll have something in writing by end of day." I didn't wait for a response. Picked up my laptop bag, walked out of the conference room through the building out to the parking lot, got in my car and drove home. The drive took 22 minutes. I didn't turn on the radio. When I got home, I sat in my kitchen for a while, not doing much of anything, just thinking about the last 7 years and all the small moments I'd let accumulate into the one I just walked out of. The Thursday afternoon's Reed disappeared. The meetings where my numbers showed up inside someone else's slide deck. The annual reviews where Porter told me I was a vital behind-the-scenes contributor, like that was a compliment. I'd carried every one of those moments quietly because I thought that was how you built credibility. You kept your head down, you produced results. You let the work speak. What I hadn't factored in was that in a room full of people looking for someone to praise, they're going to pick the person who looks most comfortable receiving it. And Reed Cole had been practicing that his whole life. That night, I opened my laptop and updated my professional profile. No statement. No vague post about toxic workplaces or lessons learned. Just a clean, specific list of every supply chain project I'd led at Crestline with accurate numbers attached. The regional consolidation that cut distribution costs by 18%. The vendor renegotiation that recovered $2.3 million in year 1. The market exit strategy I'd built over the past 4 months that the company was now calling Reed's turnaround plan. My name, my work, my results, documented and visible. Then I went to bed. 48 hours later, I had 4 messages from people I didn't recognize. portfolio managers at different investment groups. They'd seen my profile updates and wanted to know if I was available to consult on supply chain problems. I figured Porter had sent them as some kind of peace offering. But the first one I called set me straight fast. "We've been trying to track you down for about 3 days, he said. Word's been circulating about the Crestline restructuring. People in our circle want to know who actually built that model, not Reed's name, mine. Porter had been calling since the day I walked out. Not 19 times in 30 minutes like some kind of panic spiral, but steadily, persistently over 3 days. A few calls each morning, a few at night. I let everyone go to voicemail. By the time I finally picked up on day 3, he'd left 11 messages. I picked up mostly because I was curious what angle he was going to take. He didn't disappoint. "You're overreacting," he said. No greeting, no asking how I was doing. Reed was representing the team. That's what leadership does. "Porter," I said, "tell me one specific thing Reed contributed to that restructuring plan. One calculation, one market recommendation, one implementation step. Anything." Long pause. "He has relationships with these investors. They trust him. That matters in these situations. So I build the model, and he takes the credit because people like having lunch with him better. That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying?" He told me to sleep on it. Said we could work something out. I hung up. I wasn't angry sitting there after that call. More than anything, I was just clear. I'd spent 7 years being a vital behind-the-scenes contributor at a company run by a man who confused his son's likability with his son's capability. That wasn't going to change because I asked it to. The only thing that was going to change was what I did next. By the end of that first week, I had 6 different groups asking for consulting help. Not to patch leaks, but to rebuild operations from scratch. That was exactly the work I'd spent 2 decades getting good at. I started saying yes, one project at a time. The work was different in a way I hadn't expected. Instead of spending months building something while someone else collected the recognition, I was getting paid consulting rates that made my old salary look like an entry-level number. And the people hiring me knew exactly who I was and why they were calling. Reed tried to reach me exactly once, a single text that said he hoped there were no hard feelings and that he was sure I'd land on my feet. I blocked the number. Porter kept calling less and less frequently as the days went on. I didn't respond to any of it. Then about 5 weeks after I walked out of that boardroom, I got a message from Tobias Wren, not Porter, not Reed. Tobias Wren, the lead investor, the man who had grabbed Reed's shoulder and said brilliant work while I sat 6 feet away. "Nolan, I owe you a conversation. Call me when you can." I sat with that message for about an hour before I called him back. What Tobias told me changed the shape of everything that came after. Turns out he hadn't been as blind as I'd assumed. He told me that within the first 15 minutes of Reed's presentation, something had started feeling off. The document was precise, detailed, built on a level of operational knowledge that takes years to develop. But when the board asked Reed follow-up questions, his answers kept floating up to 30,000 feet. Vague, confident sounding, but never specific. The kind of answers you give when you understand the conclusion, but not the reasoning behind it. Tobias had stayed quiet in the room because Porter Cole was sitting at the head of the table and nobody was going to challenge the CEO's son in front of the full board without something more solid than a gut feeling. But after I walked out, he started asking questions on his own. He'd had access to an early draft of the restructuring model, one I'd sent directly to his office 6 weeks prior when I was still trying to get external validation on the market exit timeline. That draft had my name in the file metadata. The final version presented by Reed had the same structure, the same analysis, the same formatting, different name on the cover. Tobias had been building a picture quietly for 5 weeks. By the time he messaged me, he already knew what he was going to do. He just wanted me to know before he did it. "The board is losing confidence in Reed," he told me. 3 implementation steps have already broken down. They need someone who actually understands the plan to come in and fix it. I think that should be you, on your terms, and I'm prepared to support that position with the board. I told him I'd think about it. I didn't need long. A few days later, Porter called again. Late on a Tuesday evening, he sounded like a man who hadn't been sleeping well. "The restructuring is falling apart," he said. "Reed can't execute. We're losing ground in markets you told us to double down on because nobody understands why those decisions were made. Investors are asking questions I don't have good answers to." I let him finish. "What happened to your brilliant strategist?" I said. Silence on his end. "Nolan, I know how this looks." "Do you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like Reed accepted credit for work he couldn't execute, and now you're in trouble because you built your entire pitch around his capability. Please." "The board is pushing hard. We're losing money every week this drags on." "Your model is sound," I said. "Your execution is the problem. Then come back and fix it. I don't work for Crestline anymore, but I'll consult. Here are my terms. 2.5 times my previous salary. As a consulting rate, I present directly to the board and investors with no intermediaries and no other names on my work. And Reed Cole is not in the room when I do it. Long pause, the last condition he started is non-negotiable, I said. 8 seconds of silence, I counted. All right, he said. Agreed. I showed up to the Crestline offices 15 minutes early. Same building, same parking lot. Everything looked identical to the day I'd walked out, except I wasn't walking in as an employee this time. I was walking in as the person they were paying to fix what they'd broken. Tobias was already in the conference room when I arrived. He gave me a nod when I walked in. No handshake, no speech. Just a nod that said he knew exactly what was about to happen and he was fine with it. I took a moment to scan the room. The full board was there, several investors I recognized from the first meeting, a few faces I didn't know. Sloan Avery, the independent board director, was seated near the front with a legal pad already half full of notes. I'd been told she was sharp and direct and didn't have much patience for presentations that wasted her time. That suited me fine. Reed Cole was not in the room. I set up my laptop, connected to the projector, and pulled up the presentation without saying anything to anyone. No warm-up, no small talk. When the room settled, I started talking. I walked them through everything. The same way I'd built it from the ground up. Started with the diagnostic, which facilities were bleeding cash and the specific reasons why. Then the vendor contract analysis, which relationships were worth keeping, which ones had clauses that were quietly costing Crestline more than anyone had noticed. Then the regional distribution breakdown, the market-by-market assessment of where to pull back capital and where to push harder. I didn't rush any of it. These were people making decisions worth tens of millions of dollars. They deserve to understand not just what the recommendations were, but why each one existed and what happened if they deviated from the sequence. About 45 minutes in, one of the investors stopped me. This is an extraordinary level of detail, he said. How long did this analysis take to build? 4 months of primary research, I said. The market exit recommendations alone required pulling 3 years of performance data across 7 distribution regions and cross-referencing it with competitor movement in the same areas. The vendor contract piece took another 3 weeks on top of that. He nodded slowly. Then, when this plan was presented to us previously, we were given the impression it came from your team's VP of strategy. Can you help us understand the actual collaboration process? The room went quiet. I didn't answer right away. I reached over to my laptop and opened a second window, then cast it to the projector screen alongside the presentation. It was the file's version history. This is the source document for the restructuring plan, I said. Every revision logged automatically by the system from the first day I opened the file to the day the final version was produced. I scrolled slowly through the log. The entries went back 4 months, each one time-stamped, each one showing the same author name, Nolan Harday. There are over 800 logged revisions in this file, I said. Reed Cole's name does not appear in this log. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Tobias leaned back in his chair and looked at the screen. Sloan Avery set her pen down. One of the board members who had been leaning back straightened up slowly in his seat. The investor who had asked the question looked at the version history on the screen, then back at me. So the plan that was presented to us 5 weeks ago, he said, was built entirely by me, I said. Reed presented it. He didn't build it and he didn't understand it well enough to answer detailed follow-up questions or execute the implementation steps once I was no longer in the building. That's why you're sitting here today, Sloan Avery spoke up without hesitation. I think it's clear we need a separate conversation about internal attribution practices on major projects. That conversation needs to happen soon and it needs to include Porter. Porter Cole, sitting 2 seats down from her, didn't respond. He was looking at the table. I moved on. There was still more than half the presentation left. And these people needed to understand the implementation plan well enough to hold the execution teams accountable. I wasn't going to let the room stay stuck on what had already happened when there was real work to walk through. The rest of the session ran another 90 minutes. Real questions, specific, technical questions from people who were now paying close attention because they understood the stakes. One of the investors asked me to walk through the contingency logic for 2 of the market exit scenarios, which took another 20 minutes on its own. I answered every question directly and completely. By the time we wrapped up, the energy in the room had shifted entirely. The investors who had been quietly pulling back were now asking about implementation timelines. The board members were taking notes on the weekly review checkpoints I'd built into the rollout schedule. When people started standing up, several came over to shake my hand individually. Direct eye contact. Thank you for being here. We're glad you're involved. When does the first implementation phase start? Tobias was the last one to come over. He shook my hand and held it for a second. You handled that right, he said. No theatrics, just the work. That was enough for me. Over the next 8 weeks, I worked the implementation the same way I'd built the plan. Methodical. I came into the Crestline offices twice a week, met with the operational teams, checked progress against the timeline, and made adjustments when real conditions didn't match what I'd projected. I kept the board updated directly every Friday with a short written summary. No intermediaries, no filters. Porter Cole sat in on 2 of the early sessions. He didn't say much. I think he was trying to figure out how to be in the same room as me without it being uncomfortable. I wasn't trying to make it uncomfortable. I was just there to do the job I'd agreed to do. Whatever happened between us before that was already settled as far as I was concerned. The results started showing up inside 6 weeks. Facilities that had been draining cash stabilized inside the first month. The markets I'd flagged for reinvestment started producing numbers that tracked close to what I'd projected. Not perfect, because real operations never match a model exactly, but close enough that the board stopped talking about damage control and started talking about the next phase of growth. Ride got reassigned. Not fired, reassigned. Porter moved him to domestic logistics coordination, a role with clear deliverables, direct accountability, and no access to investor relationships or strategy presentations. I heard through people still working at Crestline that Reed had requested a transfer to a different regional office about 3 months after that. I understood why. It's hard to walk the same hallways where everyone now knows exactly what you did and didn't do. I didn't spend any time thinking about Reed after that. Not because I was being gracious about it, just because he genuinely stopped mattering once the work was running the way it was supposed to run. My consulting practice kept growing through all of it. The 6 portfolios I'd picked up in those first few weeks became 12 by the end of the 3rd month, then 19 by the end of the year. Groups started reaching out before their operations hit a crisis point. They wanted preventive assessments, someone to look at their distribution networks and vendor structures and flag problems before those problems became emergencies. That was work I was good at and work I actually liked doing. I started turning projects down, not because I couldn't handle the volume, but because I didn't have to say yes to everything anymore. I could look at a potential engagement and decide whether the problem was interesting enough, and whether the people on the other end were serious enough to work with. That kind of selectivity had never been available to me as an employee. It was one of the things I hadn't expected to value as much as I did. About 7 months after the boardroom presentation, I got a message from a hiring manager at an investment group I'd never worked with. Mr. Harte, I hope this isn't out of line. We were close to bringing on a senior strategy hire, and something came up during our reference check process that gave us pause. Your name came up in connection with a situation involving this candidate. I just wanted to say thank you for being transparent about what happened publicly. It helped us make a much better decision for our firm. I wrote back one question: who were you about to hire? The reply came back within 20 minutes. Reed Cole. He interviewed very well, but when we started verifying specific project outcomes he listed, the details didn't hold up under scrutiny. We went back to people who had been in the room during those projects, and the accounts didn't match what he'd told us. We decided to pass. I read that twice. Then I put my phone face down on the desk and went back to the implementation report I'd been working on. That message told me something I already understood but hadn't seen confirmed so directly before. In specialized industries, information moves. People talk to each other. Reference checks go deeper than candidates expect. The version history I'd projected onto that conference room screen hadn't just settled things in that room. It had become part of how people understood the situation when Reed's name came up later. I hadn't set out to end his career. I'd set out to make sure my work had my name on it, and that the people making decisions based on that work understood who had actually built it. What Reed did with his career after that was entirely the result of choices he'd made before I ever walked out of that boardroom. A year out from all of it, Crestline published their annual report. Porter sent me a note asking if I was comfortable being listed as a strategic advisor on the turnaround initiative. I said yes, full name. Accurate description of scope and outcomes. It wasn't a victory lap, it was just accurate, which is all I'd ever wanted. I still consult. The work is good and the clients are serious and my name stays attached to what I build. I don't have to fight for that anymore, it's just how things work now. Some things take longer to figure out than they should. I spent 7 years at Crestline assuming that doing the work well was enough, that quality had a way of making itself visible over time. What I know now is that quality alone doesn't make itself visible. You have to make it visible. You have to document it, own it, and be willing to walk away from situations where other people's names keep ending up on your results. That's not cynicism. That's just how it works. If you've been in that room before, watching someone else take credit for what you built, sitting there, counting the seconds, wondering if anyone is going to say your name, you already know what I'm talking about. You know that quiet, specific frustration of watching your work walk out the door under someone else's arm. Here's what I'd tell you. Stop waiting for someone to notice. Document everything. Put your name on what you build. And if you're in a place where that keeps getting taken from you, the most powerful thing you can do is leave and build something they can't touch. The work is yours. Make sure everyone knows it. If this story hit close to home, drop a comment. I'd like to know where you're listening from and what it brought up for you. And if you haven't already, hit like and subscribe. It helps more people find these stories, including people who might need to hear right now that walking away from a place that doesn't see you clearly is not giving up. It's making a decision.